Hi, Internet. I tried making this once already today, and rewatched it and decided it sounded stupid and deleted the whole thing. So we're gonna give this a second try, and it may not make it to YouTube, and if it does make it to YouTube and it still sounds stupid and vacuous, just know that this is probably still better than the original version. So, on that note, uh, if everything is sacred, why do ritual? This is the question of the hour. Witchcraft, I think broadly construed, but specifically Wicca, tends to have this view, or rather Wiccans tend to have this view. Wicca doesn't really have a unified theology. But Wiccans tend to have a view of the universe as enchanted somehow. This ranges, it can be an animistic thing where every object, every thing in the world is endowed with a spirit of its own and a sacred nature of its own. Or it can be more along the lines of an imminent divine, imminent deity, where the goddess or the gods, depending on your theology, are present everywhere in the manifest universe, and therefore everything is sacred. The general idea, though, that you commonly find, if not universally, is that this world is sacred, that living and being in this world is sacred. And this is meant to contrast with views where this world is bad and profane and to be escaped. Particularly, I think Wiccans like to define Wicca in contrast with other religions, which is probably not the best practice because honestly, a religion should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. But it's in contrast with the Christian view of, or at least with certain Christian views of sin, where, in Wicca, we don't really have a concept of sin. We don't have a concept that this world is bad and that we're trying to escape it to get to some greater next life. There's really this idea that this is what it's all about, right? This is the world to be celebrated. Likewise, we can contrast with Hinduism, where, the purpose of reincarnation is to break the cycle of samsara and to free yourself from suffering. Uh, you know, Enlightenment in Hinduism and Buddhism is accompanied by liberation from the cycle of rebirth. And in Wicca, the point is really not to get off the ride. The point is to just keep getting back on again and again and again and again. So, you know, um, yeah. Witches, I think, generally like the idea that everything in this world is sacred, that the sacred is present in everything that we do. And that's a really beautiful, affirming theology, right? There are really wonderful things about it. But it raises a tough question. And the question is, why bother doing ritual at all then? Um, if everything is sacred, then you can just talk to the gods one-on-one, and you don't need to go through the whole business of having an altar and casting a circle and doing an invocation. None of that is necessary because the gods are already here. And there are people who have that theology, and it's a beautiful theology, and it works. If it works for you, fantastic. There's also something to be said for having the ritualization of separate spaces for the sacred and profane. Profane in this sense, not meaning bad, not meaning, sinful or shameful or dirty, just in the sense of, everyday and mundane and ordinary. The divine is present all through the world, but at the same time, when we're living in the world, a lot of the time the divine is not the first thing on our minds, right? We're stressed, we're overworked, we are tired, we need to take a shit, and, the gods may be present in all of that. But when you're sitting on the toilet, the gods are usually not the first thing on your mind. And there's something to be said, I should specify, there's something to be said in the kind of witchcraft, and specifically the kind of Wicca that I practice, right? There are lots of different paths that do things very differently. But in the way that I was trained and the kind of witchcraft that I do, there's something to be said for having a special space where you strip away the trappings of the mundane and you go in saying, my priority right now is communion with the gods. There's a lot of work done in sociology of religion about the relationship between the sacred and the profane. Emil Durkheim has written about this. Mircea Eliade has written about this. He has a book called The Sacred and the Profane. It's a really wonderful book. There are things about it that are not great, but it's a really beautiful piece of anthropology, and a lot of the things that he says in that book apply really easily to Wicca. So if you're more academically inclined, by all means check it out. But so this idea of, even though everything is sacred, we take a moment when we enter into ritual space, when we have ritual, part of what we're doing is we're stopping and consciously acknowledging the sacred above all else. And this is why we take steps to clearly demarcate the boundary between ordinary everyday life and sacred experience in religious ritual and religious space. Right? This is why we cast a circle. I'm speaking we, not in the everyone sense here. I'm really just speaking about myself, my practice, the things I do when I'm at home trying to cast a tiny ass circle in my bedroom. Right? This is why I cast a circle. It's a justification for having specific ritual attire, whether you're wearing robes, whether you're working skyclad. There's a good reason to want to have a particular way that you dress or don't dress when you're entering into ritual space that you don't do any other time, right? Part of why I don't wear street clothes in ritual is that when I'm wearing street clothes, I feel like, my ordinary self. I feel like the person who just came from campus and, had kind of a shitty meeting with an advisor and I don't want to carry all of that into ritual with me. And so I form a boundary by having different actions, different behaviors that help me to understand, this space, this time is sacred. It's also why I have a craft name, right? When I first started practicing Wicca, I thought the whole idea of a magical name was really fucking stupid. This idea that, I'm, High Lord Celeborn, or, whatever. There's a really beautiful piece floating around the internet. I'll see if I can link it in the description, called Lady Pixie Moondrip's Guide to Craft Names, I think it's called. And it's, about how ridiculous people get with their craft names. Because it's a silly thing, and most of the names that people call themselves in ritual are a little silly. But the deeper sort of sacred meaning behind it, well, there are lots of genuinely good theological grounds for this practice of having a craft name, right? Catholics do something similar. At your confirmation, you take a new name. I think you choose a saint's name or something. But this idea of sort of having a specific name that is explicitly linked to your religious identity can be really beautiful and really impactful. And just like having ritual attire, when I use my craft name, it's a signal to myself and to the people around me that I am entering into sacred space. It helps mark off that distinction between, the everyday world where, yes, the gods are present, but they're not at the front of my mind, and the world where it really is, the gods are the first and foremost thing that I care about in this moment. Yeah, so, and there are lots of other things. It's why I personally don't use my magical tools for anything other than religion or magic, right? My Athami is only ever used for Wiccan, ritual shit. And, by contrast, there are people who take this theology of everything is sacred, and take that to the sort of conclusion where, in particular, there are people who will use like a kitchen knife as an athami, particularly people who do a lot of magic involving herbs or cooking or, hedge witchcraft, whatever. And they will use the same knife for their everyday cooking as they use for any kind of magical or energy work. And the idea is that they're intentionally not dividing off the sacred from the profane because the sacred permeates every aspect of our lives. And that's definitely true, and that's definitely a theology that I hold to, right? The gods are omnipresent for me. Well, do I... The gods are imminent, let me put it that way. I don't think the gods are always watching. I don't think they're like Santa Claus, with a list of who's naughty and who's nice. And I think the gods are perhaps not always paying attention. But, I very much experience the goddess of Wicca as, manifested in the earth and the stars and the moon and the sea and, the manifest stuff of the universe is how I connect to the goddess. So I feel the goddess as immanent, as present in the everyday world. And I understand that theology of not wanting to separate the two out. But I personally find a lot of value in doing ritual and in having time that is dedicated just to being sacred, because it helps me to sort of reshuffle the priorities and to be in a space and in a time where I'm putting the gods first. There's an analogy that you'll sometimes hear floated around in pagan circles, with the idea of purification and, like, why bother doing purification. It's very similar to this question of why do ritual, right? Like, if everything is sacred, then we don't need to be purified because we don't have a concept of sin that we need to be purged of. So, what's the point? Why do ritual baths or, purification, uncrossing work, anything like that? And the idea is sort of the same way that you wash your hands before you cook, right? It's not just that your hands are dirty, they might be dirty, but it's also that, if let's say you were just cooking your main course and you have garlic all over your hands, and now you want to go and cook your dessert. You don't want to bring the garlic smell into your dessert because you're making like a cherry pie or whatever. And it's not that garlic is bad. It's not that garlic is, shameful and needs to be gotten rid of. But it's that garlic doesn't belong in the thing that you're doing now. And you want to wash it off so that you can enter into the new project, the project of making your cherry pie, without any traces of something else. Likewise, it's not that our everyday lives and our everyday selves are bad, or are shameful, but part of the point of doing ritual and of setting up a space where we clear away the mundane is to say, we're going to set all that aside now and just focus on this thing that we're doing. We're going to prioritize engagement and communion with the gods, right? So if I'm super stressed and I got yelled at work today and I'm worried about money and, I have a cold sore coming in, entering into ritual, taking the time to have a ritual with a definite beginning and a definite end, where we say this space is sacred and is not like normal space, is the opportunity to shelve all of that for a while and focus on the gods. Even if the gods may be present in all that other stuff as well, it's an opportunity to bring them to the fore and say, what I care about right now is not my cold sore and my empty bank account. What I care about right now is the gods. And, I care about the gods all the time, yada, yada, yada. I love the gods are great, yay gods. But by virtue of living in the world, I can't be perpetually hyper-focused on my relationship with the gods, because sometimes I just need to, go grocery shopping. And having the opportunity to engage in defined religious ritual, as opposed to just sort of this nebulous understanding that everything is sacred, allows me personally to have more intense and more direct engagement with my gods. Now, that's not to say, obviously, if that's not the way you understand things, if that's not what works for you, I'm not trying to tell people not to do things other ways. But, the question of if everything is sacred, then why bother with ritual is a really salient one. And so I just sort of wanted to sit down and talk through my understanding of what's going on there and why I personally get value out of ritual, even though I do really like the theology, the idea of everything is part of the manifest divine. So, on that note, that's about all I have. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will come at you at some point in the near future with another blog post. Thanks.